The office of Senior Taxonomist sat at the top of Classification Tower 7, a thin spire of white metal that rose above the endless gray buildings of the Bureau complex. From her window, she could see 100 other towers just like hers, each one filled with workers doing the same job she had done for 30 cycles. They sorted species. They assigned threat levels. They kept the galaxy organized and safe. I was good at her job. Some said she was the best. Her translucent membranes, which covered her body where other species had thick skin, could sense changes in air pressure and temperature that most beings could not detect. This made her excellent at reading the subtle signs in biological data that others might miss. She had classified over 2,000 species in her career, and she had never made a serious error. Today was a day like any other. She sat at her curved desk, surrounded by floating screens that showed data from across the galaxy. A cup of stimulant bark tea sat cooling at her elbow, her fourth of the morning. The survey vessel Quiet Observer had returned from the outer spiral arm 3 days ago, and its data packets were finally ready for review. She opened the first file and began to read. The species was called human. They came from a small blue planet in an unremarkable solar system, far from the busy trade routes of the galactic Concord. They had only recently developed faster-than-light travel, making them a Class 4 civilization on the standard scale. This placed them just above primitive but well below advanced. Most species at this level were flagged for observation and eventual integration into the Concord's vast network of trade and diplomacy. I made a note to assign them a standard integration team. She was about to move on to the next file when something in the biological data caught her attention. She leaned closer to her screen, her membranes tightening against her body. This was an unconscious reaction, something her species did when they sensed danger. She had not done it in many cycles. The humans had forward-facing eyes. This was not unusual by itself. Many species had forward-facing eyes, but combined with the other data she was now seeing, it painted a troubling picture. The humans had binocular vision, which meant both eyes worked together to track movement and judge distance. This was a trait common in species that hunted other animals for food. I set down her tea. She pulled up the data on human musculature and felt her membranes go pale. The humans had bodies built for pursuit. Their legs were long and efficient, designed for covering vast distances without rest. Their cardiovascular systems could sustain effort for hours, far longer than most prey animals could run. On there, the data said, humans had once chased animals until those animals collapsed from exhaustion. They had literally run their prey to death. But it was the data on human teeth that made A's hands begin to shake. Most species had teeth designed for one purpose. Herbivores had flat teeth for grinding plants. Carnivores had sharp teeth for tearing meat. Filter feeders had no teeth at all, but humans had multiple types of teeth in the same mouth. They had flat teeth in the back for grinding, pointed teeth on the sides for gripping, and sharp teeth in the front for tearing. This meant they could eat almost anything. Plants, meat, roots, fruits, insects. Their bodies were designed to survive by any means necessary. I had seen this pattern only 3 times before in her career. Each time, it had indicated the same thing. She pulled up the behavioral data, hopping to find something that would ease her growing fear. Perhaps the humans were peaceful despite their biology. Perhaps they had evolved past their predatory instincts and become gentle farmers or philosophers. The data showed otherwise. Humans had a long history of hunting, not just for food but for sport. They had driven dozens of species on their planet to extinction, including several other intelligent hominids that had once shared their world. They made weapons from stone, then metal, then chemicals, then atoms. Each generation of weapons was more deadly than the last. They did not stop when they became the dominant species on their planet. They kept making better and better tools for killing. But it was the section on domestication that made a reach for the emergency alert console. Humans had tamed wolves. Wolves were pack hunters, apex predators on the human. They had teeth and claws and killing instincts bred into them over millions of years. Any sensible species would avoid such creatures, or at best kill them when they came too close. Humans had brought wolves into their homes. They had bred them, fed them, slept beside them. Over thousands of years, they had turned wolves into dogs, creatures that loved humans and would die to protect them. The humans had taken another apex predator and made it their friend. They had done the same with cats, which were ambush hunters, and horses, which could crush a human with one kick, and hawks, which had talons that could tear flesh. Humans surrounded themselves with dangerous animals and called them pets. I initiated the priority alert. Across the bureau complex, lights began to flash red. Screens that had been showing routine data suddenly went blank and displayed a single message: Priority VRMILLION. Report 2 stations. This is not a drill. Within minutes, A's office was filled with officials. They crowded around her desk, their various bodies representing a dozen different species from across the Concord. Some had scales, some had feathers, some had neither, but they all had one thing in common. They were all prey species, evolved on worlds where they had been hunted by larger, stronger creatures. The Concord was built by prey. It had always been led by prey. They were not prepared for what it had found. Director was the first to speak. He was a large being, covered in thick gray plates that protected him from the poisonous atmosphere of his. His voice was deep and slow, like stones grinding together. "You called alert," he said. "The last one was 4,000 cycles ago. Tell me why." I transferred her data to the main screen so everyone could see. She walked them through the biological markers, the hunting history, the domestication of other predators. She showed them the images the quiet observer had captured. Humans walking upright on 2 legs, their eyes fixed forward, their hands free to carry tools and weapons. "They are apex predators," she said. "The most dangerous type. They have no natural enemies on their world. They killed everything that threatened them and then kept killing until there was nothing left to hunt. They are the most successful predators their planet has ever produced." The room was silent for a long moment. A small official named spoke up. She was a representative of the Integration Ministry, and her job was to welcome new species into the Concord. Her body was covered in soft fur, and her large eyes were designed to spot predators from great distances. Those eyes were very wide now. "But they are only Class 4, she said. "They barely have faster-than-light travel. Surely we can simply avoid them until they destroy themselves, as predator species often do." I shook her head. "Look at their population data." She brought up a new chart. It showed the human population over time, starting from their earliest recorded history. The line was almost flat for thousands of years, then began to climb. Then it shot upward like a rocket. 8 billion, I said. "There are 8 billion humans on their planet. They have spread to every environment their world offers. Deserts, frozen wastelands, mountain peaks, ocean islands. They live everywhere. They adapt to everything. And they are already sending ships to other planets in their system." Director studied the data with his small, deep-set eyes. "What is your recommendation?" This was the question I had been dreading. In her 30 cycles as a taxonomist, she had never had to answer it. The protocol for apex predators was clear: isolation and containment. The Concord would build sensor stations around human space and watch them carefully. If they showed signs of expanding beyond their system, more aggressive measures would be taken. But I had been studying the data all night, and she had found something that changed everything. "We cannot contain them," she said. The room erupted in protests. Officials shouted over each other, their various voices creating a wall of noise. Director raised one massive hand, and the room fell silent. "Explain," he said. I brought up one final piece of data. It was a transmission the quiet observer had intercepted, a message from one human ship to another. "They are already looking for us," she said. Their scientists have been searching for signs of other intelligent life for over a century. They send messages into space, hoping someone will answer. They point their sensors at distant stars looking for signals. They are actively trying to find the conquered. She let that sink in for a moment. If we try to contain them, they will eventually notice. They will see our sensor stations. They will detect our ships. And when they do, they will know we were hiding from them. They will know we are afraid. Fur had gone flat against her body, a sign of extreme stress. Then what do we do? I had thought about this for a long time. She had reviewed every piece of data from the quiet observer, looking for something, anything, that might offer hope. And she had found something strange. There is one thing about humans that does not fit the standard predator profile, she said. They form bonds. She showed them more data. Humans caring for their sick and elderly. Humans adopting children that were not their own. Humans risking their lives to save strangers. Humans treating other species with kindness and affection. They have something called empathy, I explained. It means they can feel what other beings feel. They experience the pain of others as if it were their own. This is very rare in apex predators. Usually, such species see other beings only as threats or food. Director leaned forward. What are you suggesting? I took a deep breath. I am suggesting that we make contact, not to contain them but to befriend them. If they see us as part of their group, their pack, then they will protect us as they protect each other. But if they see us as enemies, as threats to be eliminated, then nothing in the galaxy will stop them. The room was silent again. Finally, Director spoke. You are suggesting we put the entire conquered at the mercy of apex predators. Yes, I said, because the alternative is to make them our enemies, and I have seen what humans do to their enemies. She brought up one last image. It showed a mushroom cloud rising over a human city, a weapon they had used against their own kind in one of their many wars. They split the atom, she said. They created a weapon that could destroy entire cities, and they used it, twice. Not because they had to, but because they wanted the war to end quickly. This is what humans do when they fight. They do not stop until their enemy is completely destroyed. Director studied the image for a long time. Then he turned to the rest of the room. Begin preparations for first contact, he said, and pray to whatever gods you believe in that the taxonomist is right about their capacity for empathy. As the officials filed out of her office, I turned back to her window. Somewhere out there, in the vast darkness between stars, a small blue planet was spinning through space. Its 8 billion inhabitants had no idea that their fate, and the fate of the entire galaxy, had just been decided in a meeting they would never know about. She picked up her cold tea and drank it anyway. It was going to be a long few cycles. The meeting room on Station Concord 7 had been designed by a committee. This was obvious from the way it tried to accommodate too many species at once, with chairs of different sizes, breathing apparatus for different atmospheres, and lighting that shifted through various spectrums every few minutes. Ambassador In of the Hegemony sat in a chair built for his body type, which was tall and thin, with long limbs covered in pale blue scales. He had been sitting in this chair for 3 hours, waiting for the humans to arrive. He was not supposed to be nervous. He had been chosen for this assignment specifically because his species had no instinctive fear response to predators. They had no large predators. Their evolution had been shaped by disease and natural disaster, not by the need to avoid being eaten. This made him biologically incapable of producing the fear chemicals that might trigger a hunting response in the humans. At least that was the theory. The door opened, and he felt something he had never experienced before. It was not fear, exactly. It was more like the sudden awareness that something very dangerous had entered the room. The human delegation walked in. There were 5 of them, all wearing simple dark clothing that covered most of their bodies. They moved together in a way that suggested long practice, each one aware of where the others were at all times. Their eyes swept the room, taking in every detail, every possible threat, every exit. This happened in less than 2 seconds. The lead human was a female called Ambassador, and had studied her file extensively. She was 53 years old by human standards, which placed her in the middle of their lifespan. She had spent 30 years in her planet's diplomatic service, negotiating with hostile governments and resolving conflicts that had seemed impossible. She had never failed to reach an agreement. She was also, according to the biological data, capable of killing with her bare hands. Ambassador walked toward in with a steady pace. When she reached him, she did something strange. She tilted her head back slightly, exposing the soft skin of her throat. Then she smiled, showing her teeth. In had been briefed on human expressions. He knew that showing teeth was a sign of friendliness among humans, not aggression. He knew that the head tilt was a deliberate display of vulnerability, meant to show that she trusted him. He knew all of this. His body did not care what he knew. His scales tightened against his skin. His breathing became shallow. His pupils dilated. All of these were automatic responses, controlled by parts of his brain that were older than thought itself. His body had looked at Ambassador and decided, without consulting his conscious mind, that she was dangerous. Ambassador extended one hand toward him, palm up. "Ambassador In," she said, "thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I hope we can become friends." In stared at her hand. The briefing had explained this ritual. Humans touched hands when they met as a sign of greeting and trust. The gesture dated back to ancient times, when it proved that neither party was holding a weapon. He was supposed to place his hand in hers and allow her to grip it briefly. He was supposed to voluntarily put part of his body in the grip of an apex predator. In did it anyway. Her hand was warm and soft and her grip was gentle. She held his hand for exactly 2 seconds, then released it. The ritual was complete. "Please," she said, gesturing to the table, "sit with us. We have much to discuss." The next several hours were the strangest of In's life. He had expected the humans to behave like predators. He had expected dominance displays, territorial claims, subtle threats. He had been prepared for aggression poorly hidden behind diplomatic language. This was how the conquered had always dealt with the few predator species it had encountered before. The humans were nothing like that. Ambassador asked questions about the conquered's history, its structure, its goals. She listened carefully to every answer, nodding her head in a gesture that indicated attention and interest. When it mentioned that some species in the conquered had been at war for centuries before joining, she asked how those conflicts had been resolved. When he explained the complex system of trade agreements and mutual defense pacts that held the conquered together, she took notes on a small device she carried in her pocket. At one point, a junior member of In's staff knocked over a container of drinking water. The liquid spilled across the table toward the human delegation. Before anyone could react, Ambassador had grabbed several cloth napkins and was helping to clean up the mess. "Don't worry," she said to the embarrassed staffer. "I've done the same thing 100 times. These formal dinners always make me nervous too." In watched her clean up water that she had no obligation to touch, on behalf of a being she had just met, in a way that had no political or strategic value. It made no sense. The dinner that evening was even more confusing. The conquered had prepared a feast to welcome the human delegation. Foods from a dozen worlds were arranged on long tables, each one carefully labeled with its nutritional content and any known allergens. The humans examined everything with obvious curiosity, asking questions about ingredients and preparation methods. Then they ate. This was not unusual. All species needed to eat, but the way the humans ate was different from anything In had seen before. They did not guard their food or eat in hurried gulps like prey animals fearful of attack. They did not tear into their meals with the focused intensity of predators. Instead, they ate slowly, talking between bites, sharing food with each other and offering samples to the conquered delegates sitting near them. "You have to try this," one human said to the delegate beside him, pushing a small plate across the table. "It tastes like something we have on Earth. What do you call it?" The delegate, a creature covered in hard shell plates, looked at the offered food with obvious confusion. "It is called marsh root," she said. "My people have eaten it for thousands of cycles. It is nothing special." "Nothing special." The human picked up a piece and ate it with obvious enjoyment. "This is delicious. Is it hard to grow? Could we import seeds to Earth?" In watched this exchange with growing amazement. The human was treating the delegate as an equal. More than that, he was treating her as a friend. He was asking about her culture, showing interest in her food, making plans for future contact. He had known her for less than an hour. Humans, it seemed, made friends very quickly. The evening's most significant moment came during the formal entertainment portion of the dinner. A group of performers from the species had been brought in to demonstrate their traditional music. They were very small beings, barely the size of a human hand, and they played instruments so tiny they were almost invisible. During the performance, one of the performers slipped on the polished stage surface. He fell forward, directly toward the edge of the platform, and the long drop to the floor below. Ambassador moved faster than In would have believed possible. She was out of her chair and across the room in less than a second. Her hand shot out and caught the falling, cradling him gently in her palm. Her other hand was already reaching out to steady herself against the platform edge, preventing her own momentum from carrying her off the stage. The room fell completely silent. Ambassador looked down at the tiny being in her hand. The performer was trembling, his small body vibrating with fear. He had just been grabbed by an apex predator. Every instinct he had was screaming at him to flee. "Are you all right?" Ambassador asked. Her voice was soft, concerned. She made no move to put him down, waiting until he had recovered his balance. "That was a nasty fall. Let me help you back up." She carried him to the center of the stage, as gently as if he were made of glass, and set him down among his fellow performers. Then she returned to her seat without another word. In stared at her. He had just watched an apex predator catch a prey animal in her hand. The most natural thing in the world would have been for her to crush it, or at least to keep it. Predators did not rescue prey. Predators did not show concern for creatures they could easily kill. But Ambassador had done both of these things without a moment's hesitation. Later that night, when the formal events had ended and the delegations had retired to their quarters, In found himself unable to sleep. He kept thinking about the evening's events, trying to fit them into his understanding of how predators behaved. He could not do it. The humans were biologically designed for killing. Their eyes, their teeth, their muscles, their endurance. Everything about their bodies spoke of millions of years of evolution as pursuit hunters. They were apex predators, the most dangerous type of creature the galaxy could produce. But they did not act like apex predators. They shared food, they made friends quickly, they rescued falling performers, they cleaned up other people's spilled water, they asked about marsh root seeds, they exposed their throats as a sign of trust. And finally understood what made humans truly terrifying. It was not their biology, it was their choice. They had all the tools of the most efficient killers in the galaxy, and they had chosen, consciously and deliberately, to use those tools for something else. They had chosen kindness. They had chosen curiosity. They had chosen friendship. This was unprecedented. This was impossible. This changed everything. And got out of bed and began composing a message to the conquered council. They needed to know what he had learned. They needed to understand that their original assessment of humans had been incomplete. Humans were not just apex predators. They were apex predators who had decided to adopt the entire galaxy as their pack. And that made them the most valuable allies the conquered could ever hope to find. 12 cycles had passed since the humans joined the Galactic Concord. In those 12 cycles, they had opened trade routes to 17 new worlds, negotiated peace treaties between species that had been at war for centuries, and introduced something called pizza to 43 different planets. They had also, somewhat accidentally, become the most requested species for diplomatic missions involving hostile parties. This was because both sides of any conflict trusted the humans to be honest, fair, and completely willing to knock heads together if necessary. Director, who had been so worried about the human threat 12 cycles ago, now kept a human cultural advisor on his personal staff. Her name was Dr. Sarah, and she spent most of her time explaining human behavior to confused Concord officials. Today, she was explaining why humans had sent 3 ships to the border of space. "They're just checking it out," she said. "That's what humans do. When something new appears on our sensors, we send someone to take a look. It doesn't mean anything hostile." "They may not see it that way," said. "They are extremely territorial. Any ship that approaches their border is considered an invader." Doctor shrugged. "Then they'll turn around and come back. Humans are curious, not stupid." "Well," she amended, "most humans." Was about to respond when the emergency alert flashed across every screen in the room. The Dominion had massed a fleet at the Concord border. 200 ships, all heavily armed, all configured for planetary assault. Their message was broadcast on every frequency the Concord used. "Submit to neural harmonization," they said, their collective voice speaking in perfect unison, "or face extinction." Neural harmonization was the term for what they did to other species. They were a hive mind, a collective consciousness that shared thoughts across billions of individual bodies. They believed that individual consciousness was a disease, a source of conflict and suffering that could only be cured by joining the collective. They had already absorbed 11 spacefaring civilizations, adding those species' bodies and knowledge to their own. Now they wanted the conquered. Called an emergency session of the Defense Council. Representatives from every member species crowded into the vast chamber, their various bodies filling seats designed for dozens of different physical forms. The atmosphere was a carefully controlled mixture that allowed most species to breathe. The few that needed something different wore masks or sat in enclosed chambers. The mood was grim. "Our defensive fleet is outnumbered 8-1, Admiral A reported. He was an old soldier, his shell plates from a dozen campaigns. "Even with our superior technology, we cannot hold them for long. They will break through within 3 days. "What about reinforcements from the outer colonies?" someone asked. 6 days away at best. By then, the core worlds will already be under assault. The chamber erupted in arguments. Some species wanted to fight, others wanted to negotiate. A few suggested surrender, arguing that existence in the hive mind was better than extinction. Through all of this, Ambassador sat quietly in the human delegation section. She was watching the debate with an expression it had come to know well. It was the expression she wore when she was planning something. Finally, she stood. The chamber fell silent. In 12 cycles, the humans had earned a reputation. When Ambassador stood, it meant something important was about to happen. "How many ships can Earth send?" she asked. Her aide checked a tablet. 17 are within range, Ambassador. They can arrive in 8 hours. 17 ships against 200. Admiral A shook his head. "Ambassador, I appreciate the gesture, but 17 ships will make no significant difference to the tactical situation. You would be throwing away your people's lives for nothing." Ambassador smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "Admiral," she said, "let me tell you something about humans. When something threatens our pack, we don't calculate acceptable losses. We don't weigh costs and benefits. We go to war." She turned to address the entire chamber. 12 cycles ago, the Conquered took a chance on us. You looked at our teeth and our eyes and our history, and you decided to trust us anyway. You welcomed us into your community. You treated us as equals. You became our friends." Her voice hardened. "They want to take that away. They want to turn every one of you into a puppet, a body without a mind, a slave to their collective will. They think you're weak because you're not predators. They think you'll surrender because you're afraid." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of 100 different species. "They're wrong. You're not weak, you're not afraid, and you're not alone." She turned to her aide. "Send the message to Earth, all 17 ships. Tell them what's happening. Tell them to come fast." The aide nodded and began typing. "What will 17 ships do?" someone called out from the crowd. Ambassador's smile grew wider. "They're going to show what happens when you threaten something a human loves." The 17 human ships arrived 6 hours later. They were small by Concord standards, compact vessels designed for speed rather than firepower. Their weapons were primitive compared to Concord technology. Their shields were thin. Their armor was light. By any objective measure, they were no match for the fleet. But there was something different about these ships. They detected them immediately. Their collective mind analyzed the incoming vessels and calculated the threat level. It was negligible. The human ships would be destroyed in the first exchange of fire. The hive mind authorized the attack. The human ships did not form a defensive line with the conquered fleet. They did not take up positions to protect the vulnerable inner worlds. Instead, they accelerated directly toward the flagship, their engines burning at full power. A transmission went out on all frequencies. It was a human voice, calm and clear. "You want to know what we did to the predators on our world? We hunted them. We chased them across continents. We tracked them into their dens and killed their children. We were so thorough that now we protect the few that remain because we feel bad about how many we destroyed. You think you're predators. You're not predators. You're barely prey. You're just another thing that needs to be taught not to touch what belongs to us. And everything in this sector belongs to us now." The hive mind processed this message. It did not understand. No prey species had ever spoken this way before. No prey species had ever attacked first. The human ships hit the fleet like a hammer hitting glass. They did not fight like the other species that had faced. They did not defend themselves. They did not retreat when damaged. They aimed for critical systems with the precision of surgeons and the ruthlessness of wolves. When one human ship was crippled beyond repair, its crew did not surrender. They ejected in escape pods, aimed those pods at the nearest vessel, and continued fighting with handheld weapons. They had never seen anything like it. Their collective mind was built on predictive models. They knew how prey species behaved. They knew that individuals feared death, that soldiers retreated when wounded, that fleets surrendered when outmatched. All of their battle plans were based on these assumptions. The humans broke every assumption. A cruiser fired on an escape pod, destroying it. Within seconds, 3 human ships had changed course and were attacking that cruiser with everything they had. They ignored tactical priorities, ignored the flagship, ignored everything except the single ship that had killed their comrades. They did not stop until that cruiser was a spreading cloud of debris. Then they went back to attacking the flagship. The hive mind tried to adapt. It redirected ships, changed formations, brought overwhelming force to bear on the human attackers. None of it worked. For every human ship that fell, the others fought harder. For every crew that died, the survivors became more determined. They were not fighting to win. They were fighting to hurt. 4 hours into the battle, something happened that the hive mind had no framework to understand. It felt doubt. The Dominion had conquered 11 civilizations. It had never felt doubt. Doubt was a weakness of individual minds, a product of limited perspective and incomplete information. The collective knew everything its members knew, which meant it always made optimal decisions. But the humans were not behaving optimally. They were not behaving rationally. They were behaving like something they had never encountered before. They were behaving like apex predators, protecting their pack. The hive mind calculated losses: 37 ships destroyed, 92 damaged. The human fleet was down to 9 operational vessels, all of them heavily damaged. By any measure, they were winning. But the hive mind looked at the projections for continued engagement. It saw more losses, many more losses. The humans would not stop until every one of them was dead, and by then, the fleet might be too damaged to proceed with the invasion. For the first time in its existence, the hive mind reached a unanimous conclusion: retreat. The fleet turned and accelerated toward the border. They did not send any message. They did not explain their decision. They simply left. The 9 remaining human ships followed them for 2 hours, just to make sure. In the aftermath of the battle, the conquered fleet retrieved the human survivors. Of the 17 ships that had engaged, all 17 had participated in the final pursuit. Some were barely functional, held together by emergency repairs and sheer stubbornness. But all 17 crews were alive. Ambassador met the returning ships at the docking bay. Her face was pale and her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "I hear you gave them something to think about," she said to the captain of the lead ship. The captain, a tired woman with burn marks on her uniform, managed a weak smile. "We told them who they were messing with. They didn't like it." "No," Ambassador said. "I don't imagine they did." The Conquered Council met 3 days later. The chamber was packed with representatives from every member species. Many of them still could not believe what had happened. The who had conquered 11 civilizations had been driven off by 17 ships and a species that had joined the conquered only 12 cycles ago. Director stood before the assembly. He looked older than he had 12 cycles ago, but there was something new in his eyes. It might have been hope. "We have received a formal request from the Human Diplomatic Corps," he said. "They wish to expand their presence in conquered space. They want to establish patrol routes along our borders, training programs for our military forces, and joint operations with our security services." He paused. "In other words, they want to protect us permanently." The chamber was silent for a moment. Then a delegate from one of the smaller species raised a tentacle. "Why?" she asked. "What do they want in return?" Director looked at Ambassador, who had been sitting quietly throughout the session. "Perhaps the ambassador can explain," he said. Ambassador stood. She was not smiling this time. Her expression was serious, almost solemn. "You asked me 12 cycles ago why we wanted to join the conquered," she said. "I gave you the diplomatic answer: trade opportunities, technological exchange, mutual benefit. Those things are all true." She paused. "But there's another answer, a simpler one." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of 100 different species. Prey species, all of them. Creatures who had evolved to fear things like her, to run from things like her, to hide from things like her. "We were lonely," she said. "We spent thousands of years looking up at the stars, wondering if there was anyone else out there. We built machines to search for signals, sent messages into the void, hoped that someday someone would answer. And then we found you." Her voice softened. "You're ours now, all of you. Every species in this room, every world in the conquered, every being who looks up at the sky and wonders what's out there. You're part of our pack, and we don't let anything hurt what's ours." She sat down. The chamber remained silent for a long time. Then, slowly, applause began. It started with a few delegates, then spread through the room until the entire chamber was filled with the sound of 100 different species expressing approval in 100 different ways. Director waited until the noise subsided. Then he made a motion to formally accept the human proposal. The vote was unanimous. Later that day, the Concord's Bureau of Species Classification issued an updated entry for Homo. The previous classification of apex predator, high threat, was amended. The new classification read: apex predator adoptive, Threat level 0 to allies, maximum to enemies, status, permanent conquered guardian. And across the galaxy, from the core worlds to the outer colonies, the prey species of the conquered slept peacefully for the first time in. Somewhere out there, packing the borders of known space, the most dangerous creatures in existence had decided to stand watch.